This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
A break 1 week about Techeiles. Just joking. There are no breaks. Okay, we're deep in the sea. There's no way out. Okay, this is the penultimate shiur about the subject of Techeiles. We've already discussed 3 weeks. In our first shiur in Parsha Shlach, we discussed the 3 books of the Radziner Rebbe, the Sfunei Tmunei Choil, and the Ein HaTecheiles, and his third work, and the Parshas Koirach. We discussed the 3 shittos in the Rishonim about how many strings of Techeiles are needed, including the meeting of the Radziner Rebbe and the Beis Halevi. And last week we discussed the mysterious movement of the Be'era Shel Miriam and its ramifications on Techeiles. Well, Marv Rabbi Sai, in walks in Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog Zecher Tzadak Levracha. Well, let's begin with the comments of the son of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the current Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, the Yalkut Yosef. Gam hagoyin harav Herzog Zatzal, the Baal Machaber Heichal Yitzchak, Hifrich es roiv rayoisov shel admar azin binyan zeh. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef that Rav Herzog dismissed and challenged and destroyed most of the proofs of the Radziner Rebbe, v'kava shumin acher lagamri, and he established that the Techeiles is not what is called the tint fish or the cuttlefish or that giant octopus, but instead Rav Herzog came up with an entirely new identity for the Chilazon, and that's what primarily we're going to discuss today. Now, in order to understand what Rav Herzog's position was, when you do the subject, you have to do it right. So first we have to study who Rav Herzog was, what is his background, what are his credentials in the subject of the study of Techeiles. And I have to tell you that let's read from what is called a biography and appreciation, and we'll discuss where this appears in a moment. Rav Isaac Halevi Herzog was born in 1888 in Lumja, Poland, where his father, Joel Herzog, Rabbi Yoel Herzog, served as a local rabbi. So his father was a Rav in Poland. 1897, so now Rav Herzog is 9 years old. His father accepted an appointment as the rabbi of Leeds, England. By the way, in case you didn't know, there's a far jump between a Polish village and Leeds, England at the end of the 19th century. With Rabbi Joel's appointment as the chief rabbi of the Orthodox community in Paris in 1911, so in 14 years later, just imagine this little boy, he's 9 years old, he leaves Poland, he comes to England, and then a little while later, his father becomes the chief rabbi of Paris. The family moved there. Thus it came about that Rabbi Isaac Herzog, while growing up in 3 different countries, had unusual opportunities for a broad education of which he took ample advantage. He became a well-known Judaic scholar while still in his teens. In 1908, okay, so he's 20 years old, Rav Herzog, he was ordained rabbi by the famous Rabbi Jacob David Wolkowski, the Ridbaz. Who's the Ridbaz? The Ridbaz wrote the famous commentary on the Yerushalmi. You open up any Yerushalmi, you'll see on the side of the page the commentary of the Ridbaz. The Ridbaz actually, ultimately, he was a rabbi in Europe. He came to Chicago and ultimately Tzfas. We're going to see soon what the Ridbaz said about Rav Isaac Halevi Herzog and the compliments that he showered Rav Herzog with is almost indescribable. Now, Rav Herzog obtained academic degrees in law, mathematics, languages, philosophy, and science. You know, most people don't obtain degrees in any of these or even one of these. So he was a Rav, lawyer, mathematician, expert in language, philosopher, and scientist. About the only thing he couldn't do maybe is change your tire. But besides that, he had it down. But crowning his academic achievements was his D.Lit, his doctorate of literature, from London University in 1913. By then, he was proficient in 12 languages, including Arabic, Aramaic, Syriac, Greek, and Latin. Okay, so now we're starting to get a picture that this must be an individual who spent a lot of time in university, a lot of time studying many disciplines, and besides that, he was also a Talmid Chacham, which is really a complete misrepresentation of who Rav Herzog was. As we'll see in a moment, that how many years did he spend in university? None. How many days did he spend in a classroom? He never sat in a classroom in his life. He was homeschooled and home studied. He only went in to take tests. In fact, as we're going to see, he did not learn one word of secular knowledge until he was Baki B'chol HaTorah Kula. It was Shagur B'fiv, the entire Shas with Rashi and the Yishami. So yes, he was well versed in all disciplines, but he never actually attended university. He was then appointed, now I will tell you, the Ridvaz saw Rav Herzog's compendium on Hilchos Shabbos, and the Ridvaz said about Rav Herzog, he's the Rebbe Kiva Eger of our generation. Okay, so he's not as well known in the Olam HaYeshivos, but Gedolei Yisrael already considered his caliber of the greatest of the generation, and of course he was the first chief rabbi of...
Is he related to Herzog in Israel now?
He is, yeah. Actually, Herzog in Israel is related to him. Yeah. Okay, by then, he was appointed the rabbi of Belfast in Ireland in 1916, and at the age of 28, and the rabbi of Dublin in 1919. In 1921, he was appointed chief rabbi of Ireland. In 1936, he accepted the position of Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, an honor shared equally with the Sephardic chief rabbi. Okay, he was a great leader and established authority on halachic matters, and a great teacher of Torah. Okay, so Marav Rabbi, this book, Rav Herzog was personally fascinated with the study of ancient dyes, Techeiles and Argaman. Of course, Techeiles was needed for Bigdei Kahuna, Techeiles was needed for Klei HaMishkan, and Techeiles was needed for Tzitzis. And as part of his thesis and doctorate, the Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog wrote the following book as his doctorate. The truth is, he wrote it in like shorthand and very cryptically, and this is sort of the best we could do in deciphering what Rav Herzog meant. And he wrote a book on what is called Hebrew porphyrology. Hebrew porphyrology. Raise your hand if you ever heard of the word porphyrology. If you do raise your hand, you're a liar, okay? Because you never heard. What? There is no word porphyrology. There's one person who I know who was familiar with the word, my wife. I said, how do you know? Because I remember the last time you gave this shiur, she said. So what does the word porphyrology mean? The study of purple. The study of purple. Porphyrology. The study of purple. Who made up this word? He made up the word. He coined the phrase. He created the word Hebrew porphyrology. Okay, and as we're going to see, he coined other phrases as he was an expert in 12 languages. It's an expression coined by Rav Herzog. Let's take a look in the Shalsa Tshuvas Heichal Yitzchak, which is Tshuvas on Even HaEzer, which after the Holocaust and after 1948, there were many people who did not know about the whereabouts of their spouse. And it was necessary for the Chachmei Hadar to find leniencies and loopholes for takonos or igunos. So the greatest expert in igunos was Rav Shlomo David Kahana, the Rav of Yishalayim. Actually, my grandfather had smicha from Rav Shlomo David Kahana in Warsaw before the war already. I actually have the smicha. But Rav Shlomo David Kahana and Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog and Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, they were very occupied trying to find heterim for these igunos. So Rav Herzog wrote a sefer, Shalshus Heichal Yitzchak, and in the Hakdama here, he brings that Rav Herzog was a descendant of Rav Yoel Baal Shem Tov, of the original Baal Shem, and when he was 9 years old, he was already baki in 2 Sidarim and Shas. Before he reached the age of Bar Mitzvah, he was already sending Chidushim and Kodshim and Halacha to Hagan Rav Yosef Mislanim. And Rav Yosef Mislanim already dubbed Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog the Eloi HaNiskav. So his mother would say to him, "Nu, mein Kind, why don't you sleep? Why don't you sleep? When are you going to sleep?" So he would say, "Look, the Torah says, V'higisai ba yoimam, v'layla." So when it's not yoimam and it's not layla, that's when I will sleep. When he was 9 years old, he left Poland, and he was able to absorb a lot of the Yiras Shamayim and the awe of the Polish Yidden, and he comes with his parents to England, where basically he was put in a house, and he never left the house. He literally, from age 9 until 16, he did not leave the house. Not infrequently, not rarely, never, not one time. Did not leave his home for 7 years until he memorized Shas Bavli with Rashi. And not only that, he didn't consider himself greater than any of his other peers, as he didn't really have that much interaction with them to compare. Okay.
Never went to shul?
Yeah. I'm just reporting to you the facts. What exactly, I don't know. Not only that, he lived in England till 16 years old. He did not speak one word of English until he was a Baki, B'chol, Cherkei HaTorah. And after that time, he homeschooled himself in Kemat, all of the disciplines. He writes over here, Shemei Olam Lo Yashem Al Sasa Beisever. He never sat in a school. He never saw a gym. He never saw a university. But his brilliance allowed his mind to sort of cover all the knowledge that was available. Okay, here we go. Now, the truth is, Rav Herzog was a Kadosh V'Tahar, and he had absolutely no reason or no motivation to try to debunk Radziner Techeiles. However, by accident, he was quite successful in proving that Radziner Techeiles, unfortunately, has no basis in truth and is not based on any factual information. This is not something that Rav Herzog set out to do, but something that he did accomplish quite compellingly. Okay, so in order to understand this, we have to examine the Gemara Menachos that gives us the criteria of what is the definition of Techeiles. What are the criteria by which we judge whether something is real Techeiles? Because the Gemara in Menachos does say, watch out for the imposter. What's the imposter of Techeiles called?
Ilan Kala.
Right, Kala Ilan, which is basically indigo, which is blue color. So the Gemara says in number 6, Menachos Memdad and Aleph, Taner Abanon Chilazoin Zeh, Zehu Gufa Doim Elayam. Its body is similar to the sea. Ubriyasoi Doim Eladug, and its appearance is similar to a fish. Va'oila Achal L'Shivim Shana, and it comes up once every 70 years. Uvedamim Soivin Techeiles, and with its blood we dye Techeiles. Ulafikach Damav Yikarim. Therefore, it costs a lot of money. Now, one thing I guarantee you: whatever anybody claims is Techeiles, it will meet the 4th criteria, and that is, it will be very expensive. Whether it meets the other 3 criteria, that is yet to be known. Now, Rav Herzog. When I first set out to study this subject, I realized that all of the scholars who speak about it quote the seminal book on this subject. And the name of the book was a dissertation of Rav Isaac Herzog. It's called The Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue. So one thing I discovered was there are only 2 copies in New York State. There are only 2 copies in New York State, and they're both in libraries, and I wasn't going to go there because I like to make Mar Mekoimis. There's no way they're going to let me photocopy it. So to get a new copy of this book is over $150. Wasn't ready to do that. I want to thank my friend David Callis, who got me a used copy of this book, The Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue. This is the dissertation and thesis of Rabbi Isaac Halevi, and most of the Marmakomis of today's Shiur come from there. So first thing I want to hand out to you is don't lose it, because I'm not giving this out for another 70 years, okay? Here you have, I'm giving you a colored copy, courtesy of Glatstein Press, of the book, The Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue, and a picture of Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog. One, where do you get it from? There's a cloud, where everything comes from. Can't be Megala all the Saidos, but one time I handed out a picture of the Leshem, so somebody says he keeps it in his dashboard, So here you have a picture of the Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue. Okay? And that's where most of today's Marmakoimos come from. Okay, so Rav Herzog on page 65, 69, in number 70. You could take it home, yeah, and bring it back in 70 years. Okay? The Rav Herzog quotes this Gemara Menachos in number 7, Tanur Rabbanan, Chilazain zehu gufay doimel layam, meaning its body is like the sea. Ubriyasai doimel ladag,
Which number?
its shape is like a fish. The oila echad l'shivim shana, it rises up, it comes up once every 70 years. Uvedamayit soivin Techeiles, and with its blood we color the Techeiles. Therefore, lefikach dam of yikaran, therefore it is very expensive. Now, Reb Herzog dubbed the following expression. What do you call something that rises up and appears every 70 years? Okay? So says Rav Herzog, it's called a septuagenarian appearance. A septuagenarian appearance. It's like some people come to the shiur every week, and some people come, they make a septuagenarian appearance. They come, once every 70 years. Well, that is what the Gemara says. One of the criteria of the appearance of the Techeiles is that it makes a septuagenarian appearance. Now let us examine whether this cuttlefish, as the Radziner Rebbe has identified, meets the criterion of the Gemara. So, Rabbi Say, and now for the very first time, I want to introduce you to the cuttlefish. Okay? Now, one thing I want to tell you is, the cuttlefish is very safe, and you should not be afraid of it. It doesn't pose any danger, as long as it stays on the piece of paper. But should you meet a cuttlefish face to face, this guy could grab you and squeeze you so tight that you wouldn't know if you're coming or going. You probably would not be able to return to the shiur again. Okay? So I'm going to give you a picture, and just make sure that this guy stays on the piece of paper. Okay? So, again, hold on to this. This is a very, some of this is rare footage of the cuttlefish in its natural habitat. And as you'll see, it has about 4 arms coming out of its eyes, and another 2 on the side of its head. So it has about 6 arms. Now, does this cuttlefish, Rabbi said, does this cuttlefish meet the criteria of the Gemara that its body is like the sea, its shape is like a fish, it comes up every 70 years? Well, says Rav Herzog, the top, okay?
This is the Techeiles.
The Chilazon. This is what we got.
This is the Techeiles.
Okay? This is what we got. So now, Rav Herzog writes, this appears very baffling on the face of it, but in the reality, this statement should present no insurmountable difficulty. In 1887, Rav Gershon Enoch Leiner embarked upon a hard search after the Techeiles Chilazon, and he found his way blocked by science knows nothing of a septuagenarian appearance. Meaning, one of the main questions that Rav Herzog had on this identification is that this chilazon, this particular cuttlefish does not appear every 70 years. You could go down to the port in Italy, in Naples, and you'll see thousands of these chevra just congregating on the seashores. So what then would the Gemara mean that the chilazon made a septuagenarian appearance? However, says Rav Herzog, this ingredient should not be problematic at all. In fact, like many Agadata Gemaras make a statement for dramatic effect, and there's somewhat of an exaggeration. There is a concept. Sometimes in the Gemara will say 300 or 3,000, and Toisus and the Rashbam say it's a guzma ba'alma. So too, says Rav Herzog, in reality, the expression is simply an arithmetic hyperbole of the kind which is pretty common in the Talmudim and in Rashim. In other words, let's say I say, once in a yovel, the guy knows what I'm talking about. Once in a yovel. Mamish, once every 50 years? I'm not even giving shiur 50 years. Well, what does that mean? It's just an exaggeration. It's a figure of speech. So when the Gemara says 170 years, it doesn't literally mean 170 years. It means highly, infrequently, and very rarely. Now, but I have a question for you. The Gemara says it's doimel layam. Is this guy's image, does he look like the sea? No. Isn't the sea blue? This guy is not blue.
The sea is not blue.
Maybe it's blood.
So what does this refer to?
We see the sea.
Maybe it's blood.
The sea is not blue.
Okay. Does he look like a fish?
No.
Don't look like no fish to me. I have a question. There are millions of species of fish. All you need to find is a fish with a gland that has dye in it that's blue. Many fish have glands in it, many of them have dye. Where in the world, how did the Radziner Rebbe come up with this guy? I mean, if I was making a list, and I was creating a resume for fish to apply to be the chilazon, this guy would not end up high on my list. What? Maybe you could shtup him into the criteria of the Gemara, but why assume that this is the chilazon? What identity, what characteristics does this squid and octopus have that makes you think that this is a chilazon? The main criteria that this squid has, upon which the Radziner Rebbe thought that this was a chilazon, was something interesting that the Rambam says. The Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis, Parak Beis, Halacha Beis, number 8, the Rambam says, how do you dye the Techeiles? Loik chinat semer, you take the wool, v'shari noisei besid, you soak it in lime, then you wash it, and then you bring the dam achilazon, v'hu dag, shedoime einoi le'einat Techeiles, that its color is blue, v'damoi shachar kedayai, and its blood is black like ink. So interesting. The Rambam doesn't say that the blood of this species is blue. The blood is black. Somehow from this black blood you're going to produce a blue color. And in fact, the Radziner Rebbe was able to extract the gland of this cuttlefish, and the blood was black. Based on that criteria mainly, the Radziner Rebbe identified this squid as the chilazon. Now, what is the name of this particular species? This is very important to know. I'm going to test you on this next week. It's called the Sepia officinalis. Okay? The Sepia officinalis. This is very important to know. You never know when that might come in handy. Okay? So, the Sepia officinalis was identified by the Radziner Rebbe as he was able to extract a black color.
1 minute, but it says of Yam HaMelech Matsui. How can you find any fish in the Yam HaMelech?
Okay, so
no living creatures in there.
Yeah,
you said it was in Sicily. No?
We discussed that. What is
it?
Yam HaMelech means the sea as opposed to a lake. Okay, be it as it may, the Rav Herzog gives us a very lengthy description of the expeditions of the Radziner Rebbe, including some of his background, which is absolutely fascinating. Now, it may sound somewhat critical, but understand this is archaic English. So he doesn't mean to be critical of the Rebbe, but he's sort of giving us a picture of who the Rebbe was. This Radziner Rebbe was one of the all-time brilliant minds. He never studied in university, but he was one of the great inventors in history. He inherited Radziner Hasidim from his father. He was the son of, Rav Herzog calls, the son of a neo-Hasidic wonder rabbi, meaning his father was a big Baal Moifes, and nevertheless he managed to acquire a knowledge of several European languages and a familiarity with mechanics and medicine. His love for novelty showed itself first when he was a young man of 23. Let's just read earlier. The Rav Herzog says, Liner seems to be one of those unfortunate beings who, owing to the circumstances in which birth has placed him, miss the destiny appointed for them by nature. What does he mean by that? Meaning he was so brilliant, the Rav Herzog felt he was limited by his circumstance. What does that mean? He actually invented the most efficient mill in the history of mankind. A mill. At 23 years old, he began the publication of a work designed to furnish with the Gemara the sixth order of the Mishnah. Remember, we said that the Radziner Rebbe actually wrote a Shas on Masechta Taros, on Seder Taros, with Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. In later life, when already holding in succession to his father the leadership of a Hasidic sect, he caused the construction of a mill furnished with machinery of his own invention, meaning he invented a mill which was capable of turning out 80,000 pounds of flour a day. This was an invention not of Albert Einstein, not of Thomas Alva Edison. This is Radziner Rebbe's invention. He created a mill to produce 80,000 pounds of flour a day. This was an astounding figure for Polish manufacturing in those days. Now, eventually, this enterprise involved Liner and some of his Hasidim in complete financial ruin, which is very often the verdict of many brilliant people. And that is, they're very good inventors, they're very great engineers, and they're not good businessmen. Yeah? Okay. Be it as it may, in 1887, the Radziner Rebbe, his curiosity led him to try to discover the chilazon, which he identified as the sepia officinalis. Okay, at first he was not able to produce the requisite dye, but he said, if I ever get my hands on a living chilazon, he's going to produce the black dye. By means of the application of certain colorless drugs, he announced he had been successful in extracting the Techeiles from the secretion of the disease in question. He did not show the details, but he did not publish the details, but he showed it to whoever would like to see it. Obviously, the followers of the Radziner Rebbe hailed the discovery with boundless enthusiasm. Tales quickly gained circulation of colossal operations on the Italian coast in quest of the chilazon. It was whispered that the Radziner Rebbe met the Pope, and the Pope was so impressed with Radziner Rebbe that the Pope gave the Radziner Rebbe a good word to the Tsar. However, not one other Rebbe in the world accepted Radziner Techeiles, mostly based on the fact that the Arizal says that we will not have Techeiles until Mashiach comes, which really put the Radziner Rebbe in a dilemma. Either he would have to question the Arizal or retire his Techeiles. And he decided somehow to explain what the meaning was. One of the main questions on the Radziner Rebbe was the lack of durability and fastness of this particular color. Another question was the fact that this chilazon did not appear once every 70 years. The Radziner Rebbe was relentless. He posed this the identity of this chilazon, to the two great Talmudic scholars in Europe at the time, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector and Rabbi Shula Mikutna. Rabbi Spector responded by not getting involved, with the Radziner Rebbe took as absolute shtika kahida, and Rabbi Shula Mikutna said, no, not for him. Who is the greatest sage of the time? The greatest Talmudic scholar of the time lived in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin, who passed away in 1897, the Rav of Brisk. And the Radziner Rebbe sent a shliach to Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin, and he said, thanks, but no thanks. Not for us. So basically, the fact that many Rebbes were against it, and many were just parav to it, made it that it never really caught on. And except for about 8,000 Radziner families, basically nobody else was wearing Techeiles. It never entered my mind to actually send to a laboratory whether they were producing Radziner Techeiles from the cuttlefish. I didn't suspect that the Rebbe was pulling a fast one over the Hasidim. I mean, I took his word at face value that he was producing this Techeiles from the cuttlefish. But when investigating this issue, I had sent a letter, says Rav Herzog, to Professor Friedlander. And I had made mention to...
What is his name? Friedlander?
Professor Friedlander. Why, you related to him?
No.
You know him?
No, I have a friend, his name is
Yeah?
Friedlander.
All right. Okay. Yeah, it was about 100 years ago, though.
Where
does he live now? 838... Here. I'm not sure. Not that page. Anyway... Rav Friedlander was curious as to how Radziner Chasidim produce Techeiles, and he asked me to procure for him a bundle of Radziner Techeiles, which I did. I sent a letter to then, in Rav Herzog's time. In Rav Herzog's time, the Radziner Rebbe had passed away 30 years earlier, and his son, Rav Mordechai Yosef Leiner, was the successor. And Rav Herzog wrote a letter to the Rebbe. The Rebbe wasn't in, so the secretary, we mentioned this last time, Yeshua Meir Kittelgisser, who produced the Techeiles, sent a bundle of Techeiles to Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog then submitted the Techeiles to a laboratory in Germany. And he got the professor's reply. The professor's reply was, Sehr geehrter Herr, Deutschlandere Krankheit warich leider verhindert für auf Ihren Interessanten. Meaning, it's a scam. It's a scam. Boy, it's sheker v'chazav. This blue color does not come from a cuttlefish. This is synthetic material. What are you sending me? Rav Herzog says, I can't believe it. I said, are you sure? So he said, I rubbed my eyes on reading the preceding lines. So then I sent it to the laboratory in France, and it yielded the same result. Monsieur, j'ai examiné suivant votre dessin, a whole French Torah, and what did the outcome show? It's a scam. It's synthetic. It's indigo. It's Prussian blue. This is not Techeiles. This is not even coming from a cuttlefish. Well, says Rav Herzog, I wanted to just verify this, so I sent it to a laboratory in London. And the following response came back. Dear Sir, we have tested the sample of wool furnished and find that it is dyed with Prussian blue. The coloring matter has therefore no relationship whatever to the natural dye stuffs of the cuttlefish. So basically, you've been fooled. Therefore, concludes Rav Herzog, the Radzin Techeiles thus stands self-condemned, or the results of chemistry are to be questioned. Meaning you have one of two choices. Either you could dismiss Radziner Techeiles, or you could dismiss the discipline of chemistry. Those are the two options. Either there's no such thing as chemistry, or Radziner Techeiles is a scam. And therefore, says Rav Herzog, I will not suspect the Rebbe of fooling his Hasidim, but let me explain to you what happened. The Radziner Rebbe was so interested in procuring and finding the true Techeiles that when he went down to Italy, he put up signs in the fisherman community, whoever could help me find any creature that has a gland with which we could produce dye, I'll pay them a hefty sum. Ultimately, he was able to find the cuttlefish, what is called the sepia officinalis, right? The only thing was it has black ink, and he needs to extract a blue color. So he put up signs everywhere. Big reward, big reward. The reward is that anybody who's able to help me extract blue color from this black ink, I'll reward you handsomely. And one very cunning and sly Italian fisherman, who was a chemist, who could literally get blue ink out of anything in the world. He could take your yarmulke and produce blue ink out of it. He could take your sneakers and your socks and produce blue ink. He took the cuttlefish, and with about 10 other chemicals, he was able to produce blue ink. What did he need the cuttlefish for? Because the truth is, the only thing you need to get the blue ink out of the cuttlefish is carbon. So you could have taken that, so they substituted this supposed chilazon with a piece of roast beef. And they were able to produce the exact same color. So it turns out the Radziner Rebbe was fooled, he was tricked, and this fisherman had the monopoly on supplying thousands and thousands of Radziner Hasidim with this supposed Techeiles, with basically it was a major hoax. Now what would the Radziner Rebbe say to this? We have no idea. Because this was discovered 30 years after his death. Maybe he would have an answer. In all likelihood, the Rav Herzog is absolutely correct. Nobody accepted Radziner Techeiles except for Radziner Hasidim, and that's why the Gedolim basically didn't go for it. So it turns out that the Radziner Rebbe was fooled. However, says Rav Herzog, I do admit that studying the topic really got me very interested in this subject, because I realized, the truth is, says Rav Herzog, that there are other species in the Mediterranean that actually may meet the criteria of the Gemara. And now that I've studied the subject and I wrote my thesis on it, in my opinion, there are only two possibilities in terms of the identity of the true chilazon. And therefore, says Rav Herzog was the one who discovered what is now widely used as Techeiles in Eretz Yisrael and in America, and that is called, it's on the bottom right-hand side of your sheet, it's called the Murex trunculus. The Murex trunculus. This is basically a shell. It's a snail lives inside. There's a big blob inside. And if you extract the blood of the snail, you're able to produce a beautiful purple color. Which was one of the problems that Rav Herzog has with the identity of this being the chilazon. Because the Gemara says that the blood is doimel liyam, and the yam is doimel rakia, and purple is not the color of the sea. So Rav Herzog identified it first as a Murex trunculus. However, he had a number of problems with it. So, for example, says Rav Herzog in number 11 that the Gemara says Gufay doime liyam ubriyasai doime ledag va'ila echa l'shivim shana uvedama itzavim tcheles lefikach dama v'yikarim. Could we get a little lefikach dama v'yikarim? So he says as follows. He says, number one, its body is like unto the sea. This presents no difficulty because it refers to a deep blue or deep violet blue resembling the color of the Mediterranean or of the clear cloudless Palestinian sky. Meaning, it's not so problematic, the purple color, because it is a deep blue or a deep violet blue. The second element offers considerable difficulty because does it look like a fish? Does this look like a fish? So the truth is, in some of the modern books that try to push the Murex trunculus, they sort of shtup this shell in a way. You know, you give it a little pluck over here and a little tug over there, and they found one fish. Then the right lighting, it looks like in shape, it has the shape of a fish. But does it really look like a fish? I mean, this don't look like no tuna fish or no herring over here. But okay, maybe. And third of all, the last point also offers certain difficulties. Science knows nothing of a comet-like septuagenarian appearance of any of these denizens of the sea. However, Rav Herzog primarily dismissed this as identity of the Chilazon for the following reason. And that is, the color that this produces does not adhere, is not fast, it does not stick to the material very well. It's not permanent. And one of the criteria found in the Gemara is that the color has to hold fast to the material. And this was something Rav Herzog was told washes off rather quickly, and because of that, Rav Herzog dismissed the Murex trunculus. Instead, says Rav Herzog, if, he writes in number 11, the third to last paragraph, if for the present all hope is to be abandoned of rediscovering the Techeiles species among the members of the genera Murex and Purpura, it might not be amiss to look for the same within the confines of the genus Janthina. The Janthina. Meaning Rav Herzog identified that in his opinion the best shot of what Techeiles is, what Chilazon is the Janthina snail. The bottom left hand picture. Why? These furnish a blue coloring fluid playing into violet. They do produce a blue. They're more blue, by the way, than the Murex trunculus. They live in the high seas. Now the truth is, how are they like a fish? They're like a fish. They produce an air bubble, and they float on the air bubble, so it sort of gives the appearance that they're moving like a fish. Okay. Lastly, like a great many pelagic animals, they have a very interesting phenomenon. And that is, at certain times in their cycle, they're rare and almost extinct, and then suddenly you'll go to the seacoast and there'll be millions of them lying everywhere. So they do make this like comet-like appearance where every so often, randomly, they'll just abound everywhere. He says, pending further research, which let us hope will one day be undertaking along the Palestinian Syrian coast by specialists from the future Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the suggested identification with Janthina pallida, I venture to say deserving of serious examination. So basically, what Rav Herzog brought to the table was, he successfully debunked the cuttlefish, he suggested the Murex trunculus, he dismissed the Murex trunculus, and he suggested that the Janthina snail is the best shot. Here's the problem. The problem was that if you look at number 16, a very serious study was done on the Janthina snail. In the back of this book, The Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue, they have a little kuntras called A Review of the Family Janthinidae. The family Janthinidae, it's a very nice mishpacha, okay, in connection with the Techeiles. And basically, they say there's not a chance in the world that the Janthina snail is the Chilazon. First of all, the Gemara says it has to Gufay Daima Liyam. It has to have the color of the sea. Does it have the color of the sea? Is it violet? So they say this detail may fit the Janthina, yet its color may be too violet in this context. Is it Briyasay Daima Ladog? Its floating behavior with the help of a long, slender bubble raft may look like a fish. Does it appear every 70 years? Maybe it makes that septuagenarian appearance. But the problem is that the coloring is very temporary, and it really does not hold to the material. And nobody really takes the Janthina that seriously. And almost all scholars and none of the Gedolim accepted Rav Herzog's suggestion. So here we are. The cuttlefish is relegated to this picture, but that's about all we could do with it. The murex, which was the discovery of Rav Herzog didn't take seriously, Rav Herzog dismissed, and the Janthina was not accepted at all. So it would seem to be correct that if you're going to go to Gift World, you're going to buy tzitzis that are completely white. After all, there are no reasonable suggestions and possibilities to identify what the Chilazon is. But here's the issue. Let's mention a few more things, and then we'll come to the most recent discovery. Isn't it odd when the Gemara says Gufay Doime Layam Ubriyasay Doime Ladag? It's like a fish, and yet the two most recent possibilities for the Chilazon are snails. A snail is not a fish. Why would you say it's a snail when the Gemara says Briyasay Doime Ladag? Well, actually, the truth is there's another Gemara that indicates very strongly that in fact it is a snail. Because the Gemara Megillah says on Daf Vav Amud Aleph, in number 13, the Gemara says that Zavulon came to the Rebbeinu Shalom with a taina, with a complaint. And Zavulon says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to my brother Naphtali, you gave him fields, you gave him vineyards, and to me you gave mountains and hills. To my brother you gave him lush, fertile land, and to me you gave rivers. What am I going to do with the river? Says the Rebbeinu Shalom, Zavulon, relax. Everyone's going to need you. Why? Because everyone's going to need you for the Chilazon. Shenemar, Ahamim har yikro, Sham yizbuchu zivrei tzedeki, Shefa yamim yinaku, Usefune timun echal, Usefune timun echal. You're going to have the treasures buried in the sand. Tani Rav Yosef, Sefune ze Chilazon. Wait a second. Sefune buried in the sand? No fish is buried in the sand. Any fish buried in the sand is going to die. But, Alvin, a turtle ain't no fish, right? No fish is going to live in the sand. But a snail lives under the sand. But when it rains and the holes are sealed up, then they come up. So this Gemara would seem to indicate that in fact the Chilazon is not a dog, it's doimel a dog, but it's actually a snail. Now you may make the following argument. And this is a lumdisha point that Rav Herzog says, and he says a tremendous chiddush. Even if, let's say, you could fit whatever we describe as a Chilazon into the four criteria of the Gemara, right? So the Gemara says, Doimel Yam, Briyasai Doimel Ladog, Voila Lachas L'Shivim Shana. And you could say, okay, in fact, this particular creature, you could check off all the boxes. Just because it's not excluded, just because it's not disqualified because it doesn't violate any of these criteria, that doesn't positively identify it as what the Gemara says. Meaning, you want to know, you're looking for somebody. You make a chart. He has blue eyes, he has brown hair, he has 3 ears. So now you find the guy with all those criteria. That doesn't mean it's him. That just means it's definitely not him. So just because this particular creature meets the criteria of the Gemara, it doesn't mean that this is the Chilazon. Says Rav Herzog, a big chiddush. As long as it meets the criteria of the Gemara, it could also be identified as Chilazon. Meaning, you don't need to be the Chilazon, You just need to fit the criteria of the Gemara. Why? What's the proof that that's sufficient? Because the Gemara Menachos always says, watch out for Kala Ilan. Watch out for Kala Ilan. I have a question. Why only watch out for Kala Ilan if let's say the Murex trunculus is not Chilazain? So then why did the Gemara say watch out for Kala Ilan, which is, indigo? The Gemara should say watch out for Kala Ilan and watch out for the Murex trunculus. It must be that any creature that meets the Gemara's criteria is kosher for Techeiles. You don't have to positively be identified as a Chilazain. Anything that meets the criteria of Chilazain is also a Chilazain. But again, Rav Herzog dismissed it based on four questions. If you have it in number 12, this is one of in the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society, he summarizes Rav Herzog's 4 problems with the Murex trunculus. Number 1, the greatest of the objections is that the dye of trunculus is purple, not blue. Number 2, the second objection is that the dye is not especially permanent. Number 3, the third objection is based on a statement of the Talmud that the body is like the sea. The color of the chilazon is like the sea. They're not blue, they're brown. And number 4, they don't appear once every 70 years. Well, here's what happened. Look at number 18. The first 2 objections have, with new knowledge, adequately answered. The trunculus dye is purple, but here's what happened. In the times of Rav Herzog, when you're working out on the coast of the Mediterranean, you ain't working outside, otherwise you're going to faint. So they're working inside the factory. When you produce dye from the Murex trunculus indoors, it produces purple color. But the moment you take it into the direct sunlight, the color that is produced from the Murex trunculus is a beautiful sea blue. And that's something that they discovered working within the sunlight. So that would answer Rav Herzog's first question. The second objection was the color doesn't stick to the material. Rav Herzog was misinformed. There is no dye known in the history of mankind that sticks to material more than Murex trunculus. That's a fact. Because what would happen if you took your shirt and you put it in bleach for 3 minutes? It's over. What if you got 1 ounce of bleach splashed on your shirt? Done. Throw it in the garbage. You could soak the current Techeiles today for 3 days in bleach and the color is unchanged. It's an incredible thing. Another thing I'm going to tell you. They measured the spectrum of color on the current Techeiles, and incredibly, it measures 613 on the spectrometer. Wow. The only color known to man that measures 613. Amazing, right?
Yes.
No. It's meaningless. Halacha does not go by spectrometers. It is pretty jarring, though. It does make you think that, hey, well, maybe there's something here. But that's the fact that it does measure 613. It is pretty astounding, but it doesn't really have halachic significance. It is what it is. Okay, another thing. Now the reason why, if you use the proper chemicals to clean the wool and the proper reduction agents to absorb the dye, it is very fast. Another question. But it's not doim liyam. It's brown. So there are 2 answers to this question. There's a scientific answer and then there's a correct answer. The scientific answer is, well, if you look at this snail in its natural habitat, it does have a bluish-greenish hue because it has many fouling agents on it and seaweed on it, so it does give that appearance. Once you take it out and you clean it off, it doesn't look blue. Rav Herzog saw the snail out of its... okay. But here's the better answer. The better answer is, what does the word yam mean? When we say briyasa dam yam, what does yam mean? Most people would translate yam as sea. That's how they translate it in the Ben Yehuda dictionary, but that's not the translation of the word. The word yam does not mean sea. The word Yam means the sea floor. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, look at number 19. Lo yare v'lo yashchisu b'chol har kodeshi ki malach haaretz deyas Adonai kamayim layam mechasim. There will be no harm, there will be no devastation in my whole holy mountain. The world will be filled with knowledge, with God, like water that covers the sea. Asks Reb Simcha Wasserman, what do you mean like water that covers the sea? Water doesn't cover the sea, water is the sea. It says, say, kamayim bayam. Kamayim bayam. What do you mean kamayim layam mechasim? Also, what's the analogy that there'll be so much knowledge in the future like water that covers the sea? Just say there'll be a lot of knowledge. Why the analogy of like water that covers the sea? Okay. Well, says Rav Simcha Wasserman and says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, the word yam does not mean sea, it means the seabed. Therefore it says like water that covers the seabed. The yam is the sea floor. Now, what's the analogy? The analogy is like this. Is the sea floor flat? No. There are actually mountains there. Some even say the mountains in the sea are taller than Mount Everest. There are mountains there that could be thousands of feet tall. There are valleys there. But everything seems smooth on top. You could be walking in the sea, you would never know. Everything's smoothed over. In this world, there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of difficulties. There are a lot of peaks. There are a lot of valleys. We pray to Hashem, let the knowledge of you come, so just like the water covers the sea where all the crookedness and all the depth becomes straightened and smoothed out, the day will come when our lives will be streamlined. We won't have all these big hurdles. That's the analogy. Kamayim layam mechasim. Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, 3 rayos in Tanakh that the word yam always means the sea floor. Number 1, if you look at number 22 at the end of the piece, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, the first, the raya is Kamayim layam mechasim. Another raya, Shlomo HaMelech made a yam. What did he make? Look at number 20. Vayasas hayam mutzak esrama. Shlomo made a yam. He made a sea, he built a sea. He made a big laver, he made a big receptacle for the water. Yam is not the water, yam is the container that holds the water. Rabbi Yaakov brings another raya that yam means the sea. Now, I have a question. If yam does not mean the sea, but the sea floor, then the Murex trunculus is a very good candidate. Because it's brown exactly like the sea. It's very much camouflaged on the sea floor. So now that we see that yam means the sea floor, say that 10 times fast. Now that we see that yam means the sea floor, then Murex trunculus may be a good candidate. In other words, Rav Herzog was the one who discovered the Murex trunculus. But he dismissed it for 4 reasons. But we're able now today to answer up his 4 reasons. He had a question. Well, number 1 is that it's purple? No, it's not. Bring it out in the sun. It's blue. Number 2, it's not permanent. It's the most permanent. Number 3, it's like the sea. Sea means the sea floor. And therefore, because of these discoveries, what Rav Herzog had dismissed and said is not the true Techeiles, is he dismissed the Murex trunculus. Nevertheless, today there are, according to what I read, there are over 200,000 religious Jews who are wearing this Murex trunculus, which Rav Isaac Halevi Herzog dismissed, and now supposedly they are able to answer up. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there are really 200,000 people wearing it. I mean, just because 200,000 people buy tzitzis, could be there's a Shabbos pair, a weekday pair, a bar mitzvah pair, a gift. You go there, you buy a gift for somebody who says, I don't wear that. But be it as it may, it is being worn across the spectrum. It's not relegated to any particular affiliation and association. There are Rabbanim wearing Murex trunculus. There are great Poskim wearing Murex trunculus. There are Gedolei Yisrael who wore and currently are wearing Murex trunculus. So basically like this. I got a letter from Yerushalayim, from a Radziner Chassid who says he continues to wear Radziner Techeiles, which they do. The Radziner Hasidim continue to wear it. Kol HaKavod, they follow their Messiah, and I'm not here to tell anybody not to do that. But the rest of Klal Yisrael does not accept that. And the Janthina snail, nobody's wearing, as far as I know. And the Murex trunculus has become very popular. There are institutes in Eretz Yisrael, the Psil Techeiles Institute, that produce this a mass scale. But again, we owe a debt of gratitude to Rav Herzog, because he is the one who debunked the Radziner Rebbe, discovered this Murex trunculus. He dismissed it for certain reasons, which we're now able to reconcile. So I like to give this Shiur Parshas Pinchas, and the reason is, if you look at number 23 in the Shas Tshuvas, Heichal Yitzchak, on Shabbos Kodesh, Yud Tes Tammuz, Tavshin Yud Tes. That's, what year is that? 1959. Parshas Pinchas, early in the morning, when the shuls were laning the pasuk, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Alei el har ha'avarim hazeh, ure'ei es ha'aretz asher nasati l'vnei Yisrael, ure'isiha v'nesafta el amecha. At that moment, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog returned Nishmasai HaTahira L'Shmei Maraim Yehei Zichrei Baruch. So the truth is that we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude, firstly to the Radziner Rebbe, who is really Moser Nefesh to try to discover the Techeiles, because despite the fact that we don't wear Radziner Techeiles, but we now know so many Yediyos HaTorah because of him. We know there are 3 shitas in the Rishonim of how many strings need to be colored white, whether it's the Rambam 1 or the Ravid 2 or Rashi and Tosfos 4. We know the tshuvas of Rabbi Shula Mikutna, and we know the opinions of the Brisker Rav when it comes to we don't say Safek Daraisa L'Chumra if even after the fact you're not going to have been Mekayim the mitzvah. And we're introduced to Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, and we learned that Yam does not mean the sea, it means the seam floor. So it could be, we say tzitzis is equal to all 613 mitzvahs. If you learn tzitzis in depth, you end up learning about all 613 mitzvahs. So you say, well, then maybe I need to go out to gift world now that we've identified Murex trunculus and all the questions we've answered. Should I in fact buy a pair of Techeiles? So Mirza Hashem, next week will be the grand finale of Techeiles Bizman Hazeh Halacha L'Maisa. Until then, have a great week. Shkaya.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.